The first time my manager talked about my father, he did it without even looking up from his laptop. "I don't give a damn if he's dying, Nolan," he said. "You still missed the deadline." The room went quiet in that weird corporate way where nobody actually stops typing, but everybody hears it. I remember the rain hitting the windows behind him. Gray Seattle morning. 8th floor conference room. Burnt coffee smell. My fingers still cold from the hospital parking garage. And I remember thinking something very simple. Not anger. Not even shock. Just, all right. So that's who you are. I nodded once like it didn't matter. Understood, I said. That was the beginning of the end for Grant Mercer. Not because I planned revenge right then. Honestly, I barely had enough energy to think. My father was hooked to machines across town, and I was surviving on cafeteria coffee and 4 hours of sleep. But people like Grant always mistake restraint for weakness. That was his first mistake. The second one was much worse. See, I'd worked under Grant for almost 4 years at Halbrecht Logistics. Mid-sized shipping analytics company. Lots of polished glass, performance buzzwords, and executives who used phrases like human capital while forgetting birthdays. Grant ran operations. Tall guy. Expensive watches. Hair too perfect. Smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. He loved public corrections. Not yelling. That would have been easier to fight. Grant preferred humiliation with plausible deniability. Oh, Nolan probably forgot to CC everyone again. Let's keep this simple enough for the slower folks. Appreciate the effort, buddy. Buddy. That word coming from him felt like getting tapped on the forehead with a ruler. And I took it. Mostly because I needed the insurance for my father. Dad had worked 32 years repairing city buses. Quiet man. Thick hands. Smelled like machine oil and cedar soap. After Mom died, it was mostly just me and him. Then came the diagnosis. Aggressive pulmonary fibrosis. The kind doctors discuss using softer voices. So I stayed calm. Took the extra shifts. Let Grant dump impossible timelines on me because overtime mattered. Every hospital bill felt like another brick strapped to my chest. Funny thing about pressure, though. Eventually you stop noticing the weight. You just learn how to walk with it. My only real ally at work was Tessa Vale from compliance. Sharp as a razor. Dry sense of humor. The kind of person who noticed everything but only spoke when it counted. A month before everything exploded, she sat across from me in the parking garage after work while I stared at vending machine pretzels like they'd personally offended me. "You know he targets you because you don't react, right?" she said. "Probably because I look fun to torment." She snorted. "No. Because you make him nervous." That actually made me laugh. Grant Mercer isn't nervous about anybody. Tessa leaned back against the concrete pillar. "Nolan, you fix disasters before executives even hear about them. Half the systems here run because you quietly patch holes nobody else sees." "Yeah, well, nobody promotes the guy fixing leaks." "Not officially," she said. That line stuck with me. Not officially. A week later, I found out exactly what she meant. It started with an email sent accidentally to the wrong distribution group. Classic corporate disaster. Grant intended to send internal budget notes to senior leadership only. Instead, they landed in a shared operations archive I maintained. Most people would have ignored it. But one attachment caught my eye. Vendor allocation summaries. At first glance, boring. Then I noticed numbers that didn't line up. Small inconsistencies. Duplicate consulting invoices. Freight optimization contracts paid twice through shell vendors. Nothing dramatic enough for a movie montage. Just, wrong. And I'm the kind of person who notices wrong things. I stayed late that night while the office emptied into cold blue dusk. Cleaning crew vacuuming nearby. Elevator bells echoing down the hallway. The deeper I looked, the uglier it got. Grant had been inflating vendor costs for nearly 2 years. Not stealing millions. He wasn't reckless. Just enough to disappear inside quarterly reporting. Enough to fund the lake house he suddenly bought last summer. Enough to explain the Rolex. Enough to destroy him if someone connected the dots properly. I sat there staring at the spreadsheets while my phone buzzed. Hospital. Dad had taken a turn. I closed the laptop immediately. Because despite everything, priorities were still priorities. That's important. People think turning points happen in dramatic moments. Usually they happen quietly. You simply realize someone has mistaken your suffering for permission. Dad was asleep when I arrived. Machines humming softly in the dim room. Rainwater streaking down the hospital windows. I sat beside him for almost an hour before he finally opened his eyes. You look tired, kid. Feel fantastic. Liar. That got a tiny smile out of him. Then he studied me for a second the way fathers do when they know more than you've said. You're carrying too much. I'm handling it. Nolan. Just hearing my name like that nearly cracked me open. Dad coughed hard into a tissue before continuing. Your mother used to say something about people who push decent men too far. Yeah. They eventually meet a version of that man they don't recognize anymore. I didn't tell him about Grant. Didn't tell him about the files. But sitting there beside that hospital bed, something settled inside me. Not rage. Clarity. Over the next 3 weeks, I became very patient. That's the dangerous thing about quiet people. When we finally stop hoping things will improve naturally, we become extremely efficient. I documented everything. Every invoice. Every approval chain. Every manipulated report. I never touched company systems illegally. Never altered anything. Just copied records I already had authorized access to as Operation Support Lead. Tessa helped verify compliance pathways without asking too many questions. One night around 9 p.m., we sat alone in a conference room lit only by city glow through the glass walls. This is bigger than I thought, she murmured. Yeah. You planning to go nuclear? No. She looked surprised. I'm planning to tell the truth. That's when she gave me this look like she'd finally understood something. Grant really picked the wrong guy. Meanwhile, Grant kept pushing harder. Because arrogant people usually accelerate when they sense distance. He started CCNG executives on criticism emails. Interrupted me during meetings. Once actually patted my shoulder after I presented a recovery plan and said, "See? Pressure creates diamonds." I almost laughed. Guy had no idea pressure also created fault lines. Then came the trigger. The thing that destroyed him. Dad died on a Thursday morning at 4:12 a.m. Quietly. I was there holding his hand. Everything afterward felt underwater. Phone calls. Paperwork. The strange numbness of hospital corridors before sunrise. I emailed HR and Grant requesting 3 bereavement days. Grant replied 19 minutes later. Bereavement approved. Need you on Monday for the Carson presentation. Don't make this harder than it already is. That line. Don't make this harder than it already is. Like my father's death was some scheduling inconvenience. I stared at the message in the funeral home parking lot while freezing rain tapped the windshield. Then I put the phone down very carefully. Because something inside me had finally gone still. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Halbrecht's quarterly executive review was packed. Senior leadership. Regional directors. External partners. Big room. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Catered breakfast nobody touched. Grant loved those meetings. Treated them like theater. I wore a charcoal suit I'd bought for Dad's funeral 2 days earlier. Tessa saw me near the coffee station and immediately knew something had changed. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm focused." Grant entered 10 minutes later carrying his tablet like a king entering court. "Nolan," he said loudly enough for nearby people to hear. "Glad you decided to show up." A few uncomfortable glances shifted around the room. I just nodded. Wouldn't miss it. That should have warned him. But men like Grant only recognize aggression when it's loud. Meeting started. Slides. Forecasts. Revenue charts. Then midway through the presentation, COO Marianne Holt asked a simple question about vendor cost inflation. And Grant made the mistake of improvising. He blamed operations support. Meaning me. "These reporting inconsistencies originated lower in the chain," he said smoothly. "We're correcting personnel accountability issues." There it was. Public scapegoating. Tessa slowly turned toward me from across the table. I remember loosening my tie slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to breathe. Then I spoke for the first time all meeting. "That's interesting." Grant smiled without warmth. "Something to add, Nolan?" Room went still. I opened my folder. "Actually, yes." My voice stayed calm. Almost conversational. I reviewed the vendor discrepancies after they were flagged. The inconsistencies didn't originate in operations support. Grant's posture changed almost invisibly. Predators recognize danger before other people do. Marianne frowned. "Then where did they originate?" I slid printed packets across the table. 37 pages. Time-stamped approvals. Duplicate authorizations. Shell vendor cross-links. Every document cleanly organized. Nobody spoke for several seconds except the faint hum of the projector. Grant flipped pages faster and faster. Color draining from his face. "This is completely out of context," he said sharply. "No," I replied. "It's actually extremely specific." One executive adjusted his glasses. Another stopped taking notes entirely. I continued calmly. These approvals were routed through executive operations authorization under Mr. Mercer's credentials. Compliance pathways were bypassed repeatedly. Grant looked directly at me then. Really looked at me. Like he was finally seeing the person he'd been stepping on for years. "You went digging through restricted systems?" "No," I said. "I did my job." That landed harder than yelling ever could have. Marianne turned to Tessa. "Were you aware of this?" Tessa folded her hands neatly. Compliance had concerns regarding reporting irregularities. Nolan provided documentation Friday evening. Friday evening. The day after Dad died. I saw several executives exchange looks at that. Grant saw it too. Panic started leaking through the cracks now. "This is retaliation," he snapped. "This employee has performance issues and emotional instability." That's when I interrupted him. Quietly. "My father died 4 days ago." Complete silence. Grant froze. I held his gaze. "And despite that, I still came here prepared." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Marianne asked the question that ended everything. "Grant, did you tell him you didn't give a damn?" He tried to answer. Couldn't. That was the moment the room turned on him. Not because of the fraud. Not entirely. Executives tolerate greed more than they admit. But cruelty? Public, stupid cruelty? That scares corporate people. Because it exposes bad judgment. And Grant had just demonstrated catastrophic judgment in front of all of them. Security wasn't called dramatically. No shouting. No cinematic explosion. Just quiet procedural collapse. 2 HR reps escorted Grant from the room while leadership remained seated in stunned silence. He stopped near the door and looked back at me. For the first time in 4 years, he had no posture left. No performance. Just fear. "Nolan," he said carefully, "we should talk privately." I shook my head once. "No, we really shouldn't." Then he left. And honestly, that wasn't even the satisfying part. The satisfying part came afterward. 3 weeks later, Halbrecht launched a formal investigation. External auditors came in. Several executives retired unexpectedly. Grant's lake house went up for sale. Tessa got promoted to Director of Compliance. And me? I took 2 full weeks off. First real break I'd had in years. One rainy afternoon, I drove Dad's old truck out along the coast highway with no destination in mind. Just ocean on one side. Pine trees on the other. I kept hearing his voice. "Your mother used to say something about people who push decent men too far." Turns out she was right. When I came back, Marianne called me into her office. Different atmosphere now. No power games. No condescension. Just quiet respect. She offered me Grant's old role. Operations Director. Corner office included. I surprised her by saying no immediately. "You don't want it?" "I want something else." "What?" I looked out at the rain sliding down the windows. Peace would be a good start. She actually smiled at that. In the end, I accepted a senior strategy position instead. Less politics. Better hours. More money somehow. Funny how that works. A month later, I ran into Grant exactly once. Downtown coffee shop near Pike Street. He looked older already. Smaller somehow. No Rolex. No polished confidence. Just another guy staring too long at his coffee. When he noticed me, he stood awkwardly. "Nolan." "Grant." There was a long silence. Then he rubbed the back of his neck. I was under pressure. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was ridiculous. Because it was ordinary. Everybody says that when consequences finally arrive. "I know," I said. "I said things I shouldn't have." "Yeah. I'd appreciate it if you remembered the good years too." That one genuinely impressed me. Guy still thought the story was about perception management. I looked at him for a second. Then I said the truest thing I could. The good people in your life shouldn't need humiliation to become visible to you. He didn't answer. Just stood there swallowing his own silence. I nodded once and walked out into the cold afternoon rain. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel heavy anymore. Just tired. But clean tired. Like surviving a storm you already knew was coming. Dad used to tell me something when I was a kid fixing engines beside him in the garage. "Pay attention to small sounds," he'd say. "Big problems usually start quietly." He was right about people too. Grant's downfall didn't begin in that conference room. It began years earlier, the moment he started believing kindness was weakness and dignity had no cost. By the time he realized otherwise, nobody left in the room wanted to save him. And me? I finally learned something pressure had been trying to teach me all along. Patience isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just evidence gathering.